This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube. Today I have a returning guest, and since I interviewed him last, he's become even more of a television and news personality. He's been on several TV shows, as well as he used to be the head of, not the head, but he used to be part of the British government's UFO desk, correct? There has been some confusion on this. Nick Pope, how are you doing today, sir? Maybe we'll jump right in with that clarification.
Sure thing. And yeah, I was a civilian employee at the British Ministry of Defence, and we had a program looking at this subject since 1953, and I was posted to that desk. Technically, my designation was something like Secretariat to no, wait a minute, let me get this right. Secretariat Air Staff to Alpha. But, that's obviously meaningless to most people, which is why we used kind of colloquial, does what it says on the tin descriptions like manning the UFO desk, running the UFO program or project. But any of it, all of it's kind of technically correct. My job was basically to be the subject matter expert on UAP and to do the investigations.
Very interesting. And did you ever think back in those days that UAP would be as mainstream as it is today, where it's literally growing by the day here, the public interest in UAPs?
No, I didn't for a moment think that. When I was doing that job, which was back in the 90s, the official position of the US government at the time was, we don't have a program anymore. And Project Blue Book, that was it. We closed it down in 69. Nobody's interested. Nobody's researching or investigating. Now, of course, we know different. The Pentagon has a unit fully staffed and doing this. We have hearings in Congress. We have UAP-related provisions in the annual defense bill. We've got pilots and radar operators and kind of intelligence community people who've handled this issue, speaking out in public on it. It's gone. I know this is a cliche, but it's true. It has gone from fringe to mainstream.
So what is the latest as of just before you came on with me as far as the New Jersey drones? I know earlier today, despite President Trump's statement yesterday alluding that there might be something strange going on and he canceled a visit to New Jersey this coming weekend, the White House released a statement basically throwing water on everything and saying there's nothing to worry about. So maybe you can give us an update.
Sure. Well, as you say, the latest twist in this is this kind of united front that the Biden administration is now putting on to try and play down this story and, as you say, pour cold water on it. And yesterday we had this joint statement from the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Pentagon. So very rare kind of joint four-agency statement, basically sort of saying, move along, there's nothing to see. All you people who've reported this, all you thousands of people, including serving police, law enforcement, cops, retired military, they're all imagining it. It's all just commercial drones, hobbyist drones, law enforcement drones, people misidentifying bright stars and planets. And of course, the reaction from people on the ground has been pretty robust. They basically say, wait a minute, the government is now gaslighting us. We know what we are seeing, and we see these things. We see stars and planets and little hobbyist drones all the time. They're saying this is not it. This is something else.
Yes, and I just saw an interview with Chris Christie, former New Jersey governor. He said that he recently saw two over his house at 6:16 a.m. a couple of days ago, and he agrees with the White House statement that local government needs more authority. But he says to say that there is no unusual activity when he's lived in New Jersey all of his life, and this is only starting in about the last month, is complete hogwash.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of other points worth making on this still unfolding story. Firstly, as you say, you mentioned President-elect Trump. His remarks very interesting because he was unequivocal about this yesterday, and he said the government knows, quote unquote. So he clearly is sending a message. And look, the thing with that is he is already receiving the intelligence briefings. I mean, heck, some people say he's pretty much running the country already from Mar-a-Lago. But he's getting those intelligence briefings. And for him to have dropped that into the conversation that, frankly, he doesn't believe the government line, that's interesting, as is the fact that they now have at least two counter-drone systems deployed. I think one New York, one New Jersey. These things can detect drones, but also disrupt communications between the drones and their operator. And of course, by jamming it, what that will do is probably bring some of them down. And that's what needs to happen.
Has there been any evidence yet that any have been actually taken down? Because I've also heard reports from credible people that the current systems for downing these drones aren't working.
It's very interesting. And the problem, of course, with all this is that there is a degree of misinformation and disinformation about this. Some of it is just people having a bit of fun with AI on social media and faking images, but some may be better intentioned. And it may be, if some of this is, and this is one of the theories, of course, one of the leading theories, some of this might be adversarial drones, China, Russia, military grade drones, which are bigger, can stay up longer, that sort of thing. You wouldn't want to necessarily let the opposition know how much we know. So whether we've brought any of these things down, I don't know. If we have, there probably won't be a public statement, but there is an intelligence committee meeting, classified briefing today in Congress. And it may be that once that's happened, and once lawmakers come out of that, obviously they have to be very careful, not cross the red line, but they like to always give hints, and the news media are going to be there with microphones in hand as they come out. So we might get some intriguing hints later today.
I heard an interview with Tim Burchett on News Nation just before we came on, with him basically indicating they may not all be Chinese, but he thinks some of these have to do with China. There was another congressman who had stated these might be bought from China by Iran, which a lot of people have debunked his theory, and some people have spoken out against it. The White House has denied it. But what do you think about possible Chinese involvement in this?
It is absolutely possible. We know that China, in many respects, is at least level with the United States. Some believe actually ahead in some areas of drone technology, particularly with AI-controlled drone swarms, which is a phrase we'll be hearing more and more about over the next few weeks and months, I think. It absolutely can't be ruled out. The fact that many of these sightings have been over military bases, have been over critical national infrastructure. If this was adversarial espionage, that this is exactly what we would expect to see. And it's not just, people talk about this as New Jersey and northeastern United States. There are actually, and I'm obviously, with my Ministry of Defense background, I'm in touch with a lot of people back in the UK. This is happening in the United Kingdom too, and it's happening over military bases. And there, Russia is arguably the bigger suspect, because this happened in the United Kingdom almost exactly after the government authorized the use of, or Ukraine's use of long-range munitions like Storm Shadow missiles against Russian territory. So China, Russia, both of them, perhaps with Iran as a proxy. Yeah, absolutely. This is on the table.
Yeah, I understand some activity began just after President Trump was elected, and then that kicked it up once President Biden authorized the use of that missiles. And then we've also had a mayor saying today that this was also increased around December 4th due to some possible radioactive material that might be in the area?
I've heard that rumor, and it's one of the most disturbing aspects of this. Now, I should say I'm skeptical because I'm not sure that technology really quite works that way, and there are probably better ways to do it. But yes, if you look into the rumors circulating on social media and in the blogosphere, talk that there's a dirty bomb somewhere or some other fissile material is doing the rounds. And the theory is that these drones are US government drones looking for this. Like I say, I'm actually skeptical about that. But the point that theories like that are out there just shows how, in the absence of definitive statements from the government, and frankly, we're getting mixed messages on this. One day they say they don't know. Then the next day they say, oh yeah, move along, nothing to see. It's all just hobbyist drones and stars and planets. In that kind of situation, fast moving, confused, apparent lack of leadership, yeah, rumors will take hold.
Yeah, I heard the Homeland Security Secretary say one day this weekend that a 15-year-old kid could buy one of these things at a convenience store, as if you could get these at a convenience store. And then the following day, he kind of changed his tune, saying that people are seeing drones. And now it seems that they've taken a step back again. So it is a little confusing to everybody.
It is confusing. And of course, it doesn't help that we are in that kind of dead period after the election, before the inauguration. And frankly, it's exactly the sort of time where an adversary, a foreign adversary, would exploit the kind of interregnum, if you call it that, in power where we are at the moment between the two administrations. So it's a tense period. And whatever your politics, I think clearly after January 20th, things will settle down, and President Trump will want to put a very strong stamp on this. If this whole affair is still going by then, he'll want to show that he's in charge. He'll want to be seen to be taking decisive action.
Have you heard anything about where President Biden is since all of this came up? Because there hasn't been any official statement from him, and it doesn't appear that he's made any public appearances in recent weeks.
No, I mean, obviously there are issues there with his age and related issues, and that's not unique to this drone incursion story. I mean, a lot of people are saying, where's the political leadership right now? And that's why I say, I'm not joking when I say it's like the country's been run from Mar-a-Lago at the moment. But yeah, we've got a situation where normally people would expect the president to address the nation and give some sort of reassurance about that. That's not happened. So I don't know. Maybe that will change, or maybe they'll just attempt, and I think I'm inclining towards the latter, maybe they'll just attempt to ride it out and hope that in the last few days before Christmas, the story will fizzle out, the news cycle will move on, and everyone's just going to focus on their turkey and their family gatherings, and the whole thing will quietly fade away. That's what they hope, I'm sure.
I remember a couple, maybe 3 weeks ago, when it came out that President Biden had pardoned his son, that some people found it weird they were doing that not right before the end of his term as president, right before Trump was inaugurated, and it was a good couple months in advance. Do you think that had something to do with this drone news impending, and it may have looked worse on him after he gets all this negative publicity related to these drones to then pardon his son?
Well, that's an interesting story. I have had a number of people say, could this whole drone story, which really is dominating the news cycle at the moment, could it be a distraction for something else? Could it be, like the magician's classic trick where he waves his right hand around and everyone looks at that, and really people should be paying attention to the other hand and what that's doing. And maybe this is the variation of the magician's trick. But I think sometimes that's to give people too much credence. I think, frankly, we are in the dying days of a spent administration, and a lot of people are just winding down those last few days. They're focusing on their own Christmas plans, and I'm not sure we're going to have much of anything before January 20th.
So do you think people should just get used at this point to seeing these things being around overhead if they live in the New Jersey area or other states? This is just something that's probably going to keep occurring, or do you think it's going to go away at some point and then the news is going to go on to something else after they've collected whatever data they're going to collect or whatever they're doing up there?
Yeah, it may be like the Chinese spy balloon story last year. China got away with that arguably for a long time because of the stigma about UAP. People that saw something unusual reporting it as UAP or UFO, they either didn't report because of the fear of ridicule or disbelief, or if they did, those reports were often largely ignored. And so China was able to exploit that and get away with these things. But then we shot a number of them down, and China probably adapted their plans and stopped for a while and maybe moved on to a different tactic. And maybe this is the tactic, because a lot of people have said maybe these things, and of course there was that Coast Guard sighting, very interesting. They're coming from the ocean. So maybe they're coming from a submarine or from a commercial vessel of some sort, you know, maybe under a different flag of convenience, but effectively with China or Russia or both behind. But now they've got caught at it. Yeah, maybe they'll stop, but maybe they won't stop. Maybe the sightings will go on, but the news cycle will just, the media will feel, as they often feel, that a story has run its course and there's not much new to say unless there is a dramatic announcement like we've shot one down and here it is.
As far as the objects that you've seen in the sky, I mean, there's a lot of orb footage. I don't know how legitimate any of it is. There also seems to be a lot of low-flying drones with lights on them, almost like these Predator, Reaper bomb-searching drones. And then there's the more conventional-looking drones. How would you characterize the different type of activity you've seen out there that might be legitimate?
It's a mixed bag. And I think in one respect, I don't want to sound like I'm just kind of constantly criticizing the government on this. In one respect, they're right, because there isn't a single neat answer to this. The explanation is not going to be a single thing. There are lots of things going on in parallel. Some of it is, you know, normal hobbyist commercial law enforcement drones. Some of it probably is a bit of mass hysteria, frankly, and with some people just getting sucked into the narrative, almost every strange light in the sky suddenly becomes one of these drones. But some of it may be adversarial, as we've discussed, and some of it may be something else. So I think there's lots of things going on. The footage is a mixed bag, some fake, some real, some not that spectacular. The best footage of all, of course, will be the footage that isn't on the internet, because I'm sure that some of the military grade platforms that we have maybe have captured good images, still and video of some of these things. But that's the sort of thing that the media and public won't see. That's the sort of thing that will be shown perhaps in the congressional briefing, the classified briefing that I mentioned the Intelligence Committee is going to get today. And the other aspect to all this is, and this is not being really talked about, but maybe there's some satellite data and some airborne reconnaissance data. The United States does have some pretty remarkable resources and capabilities. So I'm sure there's some great images, but we're not seeing them yet, and maybe we never will.
And Elon Musk might also have some with all of his satellites up there. He put out a statement yesterday, his first statement on this whole situation, saying to search on Gork if you want to know the answer, something along those lines.
Yeah, Elon Musk's an interesting character with this. With the wider UAP and alien issue, his previous statements have been quite skeptical. And I think they're grounded in his view that, hey, look, I'm going into space through SpaceX and things, more than pretty much everyone, more than NASA right now. If there's anything up there, we'd see them. And that was his position. But I think he has recognized the way in which this whole drone story has captured the zeitgeist, and he is taking another look at this. And I'd love to know what he's thinking about this behind the scenes. But I'm following his posts on X, of course, and we'll see which way he goes with it.
Somebody has a question, and this is a good question that you probably don't know the answer to, but when they say we see them coming from over the ocean, what do they mean? Under the ocean, from the air, above the ocean, on the surface of the water? They're not very specific when they say the ocean or the shoreline.
No, there was some footage there was an interview where they were talking about a Coast Guard vessel, which was apparently being followed whilst out at sea by multiple drones, craft, call them what you like. So that's why there is the suspicion, quite apart from the logical fact that no one's really seen anyone launch these. So that's why there is this suspicion that they're coming off of either a submarine or an offshore ship of some sort. And that would explain maybe why they're not really being tracked back to their base. I suspect, maybe they turn the lights off and fly them onto the deck of a vessel, which itself has its lights out, or, like I say, a submarine. And then it goes back under the surface and the trail goes cold. So, but those are all questions that hopefully the US military and the intelligence community and other agencies are working on.
As far as your own theories about potential underwater bases, you talked to me about this a few years ago, but have you seen any more developments as far as UAPs going underwater lately? Because it seems like more and more footage is coming out of this lately. Even the recent George Knapp Investigation Aliens Netflix series actually caught a UAP going underwater.
Sure. Well, it's one of those cliches that's true. We know less about the deep ocean than we do about the surface of the moon or Mars. And that's absolutely correct. And Lou Elizondo, of course, intelligence community guy who ran the Pentagon's ATIP program, he's talked a lot, as have Chris Mellon, retired senior intelligence community official, about this so-called transmedium travel, this apparent ability of some of these craft to move seamlessly from the atmosphere to under the sea. And again, I don't have any new information about underground bases. I know it's a rumor that's been out there for many, many years, but when intelligence community folks like Lou Elizondo start talking about this and putting it out there and starting a conversation, it comes again, like I said at the beginning, out of the fringe and into the mainstream. And it's no longer just some dark corner of the internet where there's conspiracy theories. This is a guy who's testified under oath in front of the United States Congress.
As far as the unusual timing of these drone sightings, it seems to be overall between 5:30 p.m. and 12 a.m. with some exceptions. Do you think there's some reason behind that? Because a lot of people have said if you want to be inconspicuous, that's the time everyone's doing their Christmas shopping, driving home from work, going to sports practices and so forth.
Yes, although extending that argument, I'd say if you wanted to be really inconspicuous, you'd probably go for that slot between, 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, whenever it is that cops and FBI tend to do most of their raids. I mean, that time, if you want to fly something unobserved, then that's the time to do it, which raises the intriguing question. And again, this is a lot of people contacting me about this, saying that they think to some extent these things want to be seen, which again takes you back to the idea of, is this a psyop? Is there some sort of psychological operation, I don't know, to cause panic? Or as I postulated a few minutes ago, to distract us from something else. That's why this is such an interesting, multifaceted story. There are so many different aspects to it, so many different theories out there, and we're not yet in a situation where we're able to kind of say that any one of those theories is proven.
I have heard the government say they don't believe there's any connection, even though they're saying nothing's going on. They have said that they don't believe there's any connection to what's going on in the New Jersey, Connecticut, New York area to what just happened in Oregon last week with the pilot actually encountering, I believe, 4 or 5 UAP orb-like things, and it was caught on the radar audio, the controller audio, and released to the public. What do you think? Is there any connection to this, or 2 separate incidents?
I think it's 2 separate incidents, but it raises the wider point of again, the underreporting of this. Because I suspect that even when this news media obsession with this story runs down, the sightings themselves will still be going on. And it's like that with the pilots. Pilots see these things all the time, both military pilots and commercial airline pilots. But what we hear about is just the tip of the iceberg. Despite efforts to reduce the stigma is still there. And of course, the military reports are not getting public exposure at all. Those military pilots, when they report things, if they decide to make an official report, not all of them do, but they go to the Pentagon's AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And while AARO will publish an update report every 6 months or so, they won't necessarily publish all the details unless they do a deep dive and a case study. So these things, these pilot sightings are going on all the time. It's just that I think the drone incursion has maybe made it more likely that those people will speak out, and then the media will run the story.
As far as some of the most credible footage and instances people should look up, I know you're an expert on the Rendlesham Forest incidents. Is there any other similar ones that people that are kind of new to this topic or on the fence you would suggest that they look into?
Well, I think look at obviously all those 3 US Navy videos that they put out a few years ago on the DoD website, Tic Tac, Gimbal, and Go Fast. Now they say they think Go Fast actually has a conventional explanation, but the other 2 remain unexplained. So all those US Navy sightings and some of the other ones, I mean, some of the bizarre ones that people like George Knapp, who you mentioned earlier, and Jeremy Corbell have put out some intriguing images, both still and video, that have been passed to them by military sources. The jellyfish UAP, the Mosul orb, those are worth a look. Then there's a great case in the United Kingdom called the Cosford incident from March of 1993. A lot of good information about that. There's a photographic case from 1990 in Scotland called the Calvine incident, which I looked at for the Ministry of Defence. A lot of good information on that out there. So there are many, many cases, flagship cases, the sort of crown jewels that both the British and the US government have, to some degree, declassified and released some of this. And again, we're seeing a very interesting opening up in some areas, but secrecy still in others.
When you were working for the government, did you read much into the various types of alleged beings being reported, or was it all pretty much related to the craft themselves?
We did get those entity report, close encounter reports, abduction reports, call them whatever you like. Obviously, we in the Ministry of Defence were more focused on the nuts and bolts, the technology of it, where you had pilots seeing things, radar operators tracking things with speeds, maneuvers, and accelerations that go way beyond the cutting edge of our own aerospace tech. But so we didn't really do a deep dive into too much of that, because frankly, 99 times out of 100 with those reports, all you really have is somebody's story, and what you want is the hard data, the physical data, whether it's radar data, whether it's satellite images, whether it's MASINT, measurement and signature intelligence, which is all very technical and highly classified. But yeah, we got the reports.
You mentioned earlier that people are mostly focusing on the US and it's being reported mostly in the US for whatever reason. I know I'm from Canada. It hasn't been reported that much there. And from what I understand, it's not as big a story in the UK, even though there has been some incursions over joint bases over there. Could you tell us some of the other places where these similar types of incursions have been happening recently? Because I heard Germany as well is one of the more legit areas.
Germany, yeah, absolutely. Now, the Pentagon's Arrow unit just about 2 or 3 weeks ago did publish an update on their arrow.mil website. So that's AARO.mil. And they have published a map which shows UFO hotspots. Now, that's only a snapshot, because it's only the reports that were sent to them. So it's by no means a global kind of situation report, but it's worth a look. That shows some hotspots. And to your point, I mean, it's interesting about Canada. People forget that with the Chinese spy balloons, and I'm using that in the plural deliberately, some of the subsequent shootdowns, there was one off the coast of the United States, but some of the shootdowns were actually up over Canadian territory, and we've heard very little about that. What we do know is that the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance has a UAP working group, or caucus, however you want to characterize it. So we know that at the Five Eyes level, of course, Canada is involved. The United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand, of course, are the Five Eyes nations. Now, none of that will be made public in any way, because that's all top secret information. But those nations are engaged in what does look to be a US-led approach on this, but plenty of reports from South America too. They're obviously not in the Five Eyes, but Brazil, Chile, Argentina, some of the other nations down there. It's just that sometimes the language and the culture, we tend to focus on the US, the UK and Canada, just because we gravitate towards English-speaking nations, but plenty of reports further afield if we go and look for them.
And speaking of that UAP shot down over the Yukon, one small report that came out, and this was only covered by CTV News a couple months ago, was they actually released a picture that was obtained by a FOIA request of the one that was shot down over the Yukon. And it didn't really look like the spy balloon that was shot down in the US that they showed pictures of. It looked more like a Pac-Man type image, but they did say it was a photocopy of a picture. They released it like that on purpose.
Yes, I think sometimes you get some camera artifacts as well. So the image is interesting, and it's obviously important that it was released. But the real issue there, and this the media and the public won't get to see, I'm sure, because it's classified, is the data, the raw data from the various sensor platforms that they'll have been using. But as I say, that we likely won't see.
Any truth to the rumor that you were hosting the reboot of UFO Hunters?
No, I hadn't actually heard that. I didn't realize that rumor was doing the rounds. I'm doing a lot of TV projects, but that's not one of them, unless some network executive has me in mind and hasn't told me yet. But I get media requests all the time, either for TV news interviews or documentaries. And I'm constantly having a range of conversations about that. But obviously, I can't do everything.
As far as the Colares UAP kind of like attack situation that recently was part of that Investigation Alien series, but the story has been making the rounds a lot more in recent years. What do you think of that whole situation where it seems like there was actually human harm done by this type of phenomena on a regular basis for at least a couple of years, it seems?
Well, we know that the whole human harm issue is almost the most sensitive part of all of this. Some of the people who've been involved in programs and have spoken about this, like Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, David Grush, a few others, have kind of, I don't know, I will say, danced around the edges of this. They choose their words very carefully. It's somewhere in the DIA reading room. There is a declassified Defense Intelligence research document that, again, talks about physiological effects on humans. Everyone dresses this up in very careful language. The British government, too. We did an intelligence assessment where, again, we danced around this issue by using the phrase UAP radiation. And we talked about how, for example, some of the Rendlesham Forest incidents, witnesses were exposed to that. Colares, absolutely. Maybe you can get away, whoever or whatever is operating these craft, maybe they can get away with more in certain geographical areas than others. But what I do know is that the UAP task force and then ATIP and then now Arrow, the people involved with those US government programs on UAP, they have information about Colares. How much of it will come out, I don't know.
And I understand supposedly there's about a 20 to 30-minute video that was taken by the government during all of this time, by the Brazil government, that supposedly the US government has. Of course, you probably wouldn't know anything about that other than the rumor that it exists, but that would be pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, just the compartmented nature of information on this topic means that I would not have been read into any program on that, and I've certainly not seen it. I'm sure that if anyone has it, it probably is in some basement office in the Pentagon somewhere. And who knows? Maybe this will be the subject, I hope it is, of a future congressional hearing, because of course Congress, both in the Senate and the House, has been holding hearings on this and has in parallel been receiving classified briefings. I'd like to see some people interviewed and testifying under oath. But of course, the problem with that, as you know, is whether the moment you hit the really interesting but sensitive bits, the witnesses kind of say, well, I can only discuss that in a skiff. And obviously it won't then form part of the public hearing.
And I understand they still haven't put David Grush in a skiff, even though that hearing took place, in July of 2023. So they're not doing a good job really of getting these people in quickly for whatever reason.
They're not, but the government are not making it easy for them to do that. So it's difficult to nail down exactly where the roadblock is here. But for example, David Grush, my understanding is that he no longer has his security clearance, which makes it doubly difficult because you'd have to reinstate that even on a temporary basis, as some lawmakers have said should be done. And then you've got to get him into the skiff. Now, some of the other people involved in these sorts of programs, and again, I don't want to speak out of turn, and I don't know exactly who has what, but I'm pretty sure that people like Jay Stratton, Lou Elizondo, Travis Taylor do still have security clearances. So it would be easier to get them into a skiff, but still, A, the media and the public won't get to hear that, and B, even in that environment with some of the most highly classified information, not everyone on those congressional committees is authorized for receipt of that information. Some information is literally only for the so-called Gang of Eight, and sometimes there are even operations where the Gang of Eight are not told. There are some things that happen literally on a sort of presidential authorization where not even the Gang of Eight get told. It's murky.
You mentioned the basement office room. I got to ask you because around 2019, you did a series with the New York Post called The Basement Office Videos. And it seems like since then, that reporter who seemed to be very neutral towards UFOs when he was working with you kind of became anti UFOs in many ways. Is there a reason for that you're aware of?
Well, I think that's Stephen Greenstreet at the New York Post, and yeah, we did a couple of seasons where we co-hosted the show that he'd created, The Basement Office, and some of those early season 1 and season 2 episodes have over 1 million views on even just YouTube, and it's up obviously on the New York Post website too. But Stephen changed his mind on this. I mean, that's absolutely his prerogative. I think if you talk to him, he feels that people were trying to play him. People either still in or formerly in the intelligence community were trying to almost recruit him and shape his narrative. And he pushed back against that and went, I guess, sort of violently the other way. And that's kind of where he's at right now. But he's an interesting character, and he has done some great work on this. And look, everyone should listen to both sides of the story. I mean, people should never blindly accept the narrative that's been put out from one particular side of that. So absolutely, people should listen to Stephen Greenstreet and people like Mick West and some of the other skeptics. I don't necessarily agree with them all the time, but sometimes they are right. I mean, look, 95% plus of anything that gets kind of labeled UAP is going to turn out to be misidentifications, hoaxes, psychological delusions, mass hysteria, whatever. So yeah, very often the skeptics are right.
Someone on here was asking, have we seen much of these drone incursions in Australia? I've had a fan that has been sending me all sorts of videos from the Sydney area, but maybe you could fill us in about sightings over there.
I will be honest with you, I have not heard much about that. I mean, inevitably, my focus has been on the US and the UK. I think I had one email from somebody who said, hey, there's something going on down in Australia too, but I can't recall the details. I didn't have time to look at it in depth. But again, you know, I'm sure those reports are out there. It's just that the focus at the moment tends to be on the US and to a slightly lesser extent the UK.
Now, I haven't asked you about Roswell in the last interview I did with you, and I'm just wondering your opinion on that whole crash situation, which Lou Elizondo did reveal some credible information about recently in his book, Imminent.
Yes, and what's doubly interesting about that is when David Grush was asked about this, he had quite a lot to say about all sorts of other incidents, but he just, when we kind of hit Roswell question, he completely clammed up and he said, I can't discuss that. And that in itself is interesting. I always look for those red lines. As a former government employee, I look for what somebody doesn't say. And clearly, looking at his body language, listening to his exact words, his tone of voice, what I think he was trying to say is that somebody had told him he was not able to discuss that. And that draws my attention to it. And I ask, well, look, if this was just a weather balloon or a classified Project Mogul balloon to try and monitor upper atmosphere Soviet activity, nuclear tests, effectively, if that's all it was, I mean, 80 years on, why can't we say so? So something about Roswell is still sensitive and classified, but what it is, again, as a Brit who wasn't read into those US programs, I don't know.
You've had a lot of fans commenting on here about Ancient Aliens, which you're often featured on. I think you've hosted it as well. And I know you do conferences with that group. What are some of the best examples of Ancient Aliens, in your opinion?
Well, depending on how you count it, and I know the network and Internet Movie Database do it a different way, but I think we're in something like season 20 now. It started as a one-off special in 2009, and before Christmas, I was filming some new episodes for the next season. I'm going to resume that in the new year. Giorgio Tsoukalos is really the face of the show, of course, and the hair of the show, as I always joke. There are obviously an amazing number of sites around the world, some of them very well-known ones like the pyramids, Stonehenge, and Pumapunku, some of them less well-known, like Karnak in France. And so Ancient Aliens is very much keeping this in the public eye. And the other thing about Ancient Aliens is over the last few years, I think there's been a realization that as much as it's about the ancient sites, the monuments, the idea that the ancient gods were perhaps extraterrestrials, and maybe some of them never left, they're the Watchers, and maybe some of them are returning in force, but they're also covering the UFO stories too. So Ancient Aliens is now a bit of modern aliens. And yes, there is a live show, Ancient Aliens Live, tours all around the United States. I moderate that, and we've done about 80 shows, I think, over the last 2.5 years. 13 more scheduled for 2025, with more being put in the diary all the time. AncientAliensLiveTour.com for that. Come and see us in person.
Someone is asking if you have any credible information about observations of UAP in Argentina or China.
Pardon me, Argentina or
China?
Argentina, yes. I think there is a branch of the Mutual UFO Network that looks after Argentina. There's also, I think, a number of Argentine national organizations. Obviously, a lot of that is in Spanish, so you have to either speak Spanish or go to one of the translation apps for that. But they do have a lot of activity down there. China, we know much less about, just the closed nature of that society and the regime there. What we do know through intelligence sources, but also a very general official I guess, confirmation. What we do know is that the Chinese government have had for a number of years a program looking at this, probably the Chinese equivalent of Arrow. But unlike Arrow, which has a website and publishes reports and is answerable to Congress, I mean, they come and brief Congress from time to time, we are not going to hear any of that out of the Chinese government just because of the nature of the regime there.
What did you think about those Peru alleged alien, I guess, what were they, art mummy type things that were released not too long ago? And I guess there was a hearing about them at some point in Mexico, I think.
Yeah, there was a press conference in Mexico. They'd gotten some of the mummies out, but then I know that the Peruvian government pushed back against that and asked some questions about export licenses. I'm not sure entirely what's going on, but there may be ongoing legal action about that. And I'll be frank on this, without access to the actual mummies and without, speaking to scientists who will do analyses and then release the data and get them written up into peer-reviewed journals. And I know some people have said that that's gone on. I'm not sure that we've got peer-reviewed articles, and it certainly hasn't been written up yet in Science or Nature or something like that. So I've followed the story just through the media and through the UFO community, but I've not had the time or the resources to look at it personally.
Do you think some of these UAPs involved with these drone incursions? I know we're calling everything drones now, but do you think some are legitimate UAP, possible visitor type phenomena?
I can't rule it out, but you make an interesting point about the language. It all depends. Yeah, drone has kind of become almost a catch-all for anything strange in the sky. But there was when the current director of the Pentagon's UFO office, Arrow, last appeared in front of the media. He did a media roundtable, and one of the questions he got was, "Well, hey, look, we've had these incursions." This was before the New Jersey incursions, but we'd had the ones at Langley Air Force Base, and he was asked about that, and he said, "Look, there's always a debate about how do you classify this: UAP, UAS, UAV, or drone." And sometimes people use those terms, particularly UAV and UAS, so unmanned aircraft system, unmanned aerial vehicle. Those are sometimes used interchangeably, and even with drone. So it's very difficult. He said Arrow did not lead on the Langley incursions, and when Arrow doesn't lead, that steers you towards this more being what you and I would call drones, as opposed to UAP, UAF. So Langley did not appear to be UAP. These ones, we're kind of still having that debate. But again, the key question is Arrow involved? At the moment, I have not seen any evidence that they are. So again, that's why I'm looking on this one. I'm thinking it's more likely to be Russian than Martian, if you'll excuse the joke, or Chinese, perhaps.
I guess in a way, it's kind of good that if you call them drones, people will listen to you now, because some people won't even hear you out if you try and use the term UAP or UFO. But drones, they'll definitely hear you out these days.
They will, and pilots have been doing this for some years now, and good luck to them. I think it was a smart move. No pilot, certainly a few years ago, would have wanted to say, "I've seen a UFO," military or civilian. Some of them are still reluctant to say UAP, so they use the phrase drone, or they'll say, "I've seen an unconventional aircraft," or they'll say, "I've seen an unmanned aerial system," and they'll use that language so that they don't get drawn into that cycle of ridicule and disbelief. So yeah, sometimes people are just spraying the use of the word drone liberally around as a kind of catch-all, so that they don't have to go down this other route of coming out and saying UAP or, God forbid, UFO.
As far as AARO, they recently debunked the gimbal video. What do you think about their observations related to the gimbal? Are you in agreement with them, or is there something they're missing out on?
Well, I thought, now I may have this wrong, I thought it was Go Fast that they debunked.
You're probably right. You're probably right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and the joke was, they said Go Fast didn't go very fast, and they estimated the speed at something like 45 miles an hour. My goodness, I nearly started a conspiracy theory there. And they said that this was parallax effect, and it's kind of an optical illusion because the object was not as low over the sea as you might think. This illusion of speed was just that, an illusion. And they've published an analysis on their arrow.mil website, and I don't have the technical knowledge to debunk their debunking of this. But again, I think it's interesting, if they've debunked one of the 3 videos that came out right on or after December 2017, when the New York Times published the story about ATIP and the US Navy videos. If they've debunked one but not the other two, again, that in itself is interesting. But I have no reason to disbelieve them. And again, it goes back to the point. Look, I'm all for, if we have a conventional explanation, fine, good. Let's get that out there, publish the data. Then we can hone in more precisely on the ones that haven't been explained, the core phenomenon, so to speak.
There's been some talk about an imminent UFO event, maybe in 2026, 2027. Lou Elizondo is supposedly spoken about this off the record a little bit, and has even addressed it on the record in one interview, but said he couldn't talk about it, but he wouldn't confirm or deny it. Leslie Keane has kind of alluded to it as well. Have you heard anything about some type of imminent event that maybe the world needs to know more about UAPs before this event takes place, so we can be more prepared for whatever it is?
There have been rumors circulating in the astronomy community, of course, and the more general scientific community, rumors circulating for most of the year that the James Webb Space Telescope has maybe found something, strong evidence of a techno-signature, perhaps, and that people have been waiting for this article to drop. And that plays into the UAP issue, because if there's a cover-up, as many believe, the point where all this can't be hidden anymore, the point where the existence of extraterrestrial life, even though the existence of extraterrestrial life and alien visitation are not exactly the same thing, but they're closely related. The point you can't keep a lid on this anymore, the point where it is not a secret, is the point where you don't bother trying. And so if they do announce that James Webb has found something, that maybe is the point that the whole UAP issue will be unpacked. And then, of course, you get into a debate about, is it controlled disclosure or catastrophic disclosure? Now, I've heard 2026, 2027, depending on who you talk to. And I've heard that from people with backgrounds in the intelligence community. So it's not just internet chit chat. Controlled disclosure is the idea that there's a carefully orchestrated program, a little bit of, sort of drip feed information here, acclimatizing people to the reality of this, and maybe, the last domino falls in 26 or 27. And then there's that's controlled disclosure. And then catastrophic disclosure is the idea that it all comes off the rails, and that for some reason it all happens at once. Maybe an adversary puts it out there to cause geopolitical instability and chaos. So I've heard these stories. I don't know how it will unfold, but I think we're in for a very interesting next few months, couple of years.
As far as catastrophic disclosure, it seems now, with even more and more coming out, the people that didn't believe before overall still aren't believing. The people that were in the middle are interested more, and the people that already believed. It didn't. I would have thought more would be interested, but it seems like some of the people I talked to, no evidence will be good enough.
No, some people are natural contrarians on this, and their mind is made up, so there's no point even having that discussion with them. You always find this, and it's like, if you look at the kind of spectrum of totalitarianism, where actually the far left and the far right kind of come round and meet each other, and they're indistinguishable. It's the same with the belief spectrum on UAP. The true believers and the diehard debunkers are much closer to each other than people would think. So far from being at extreme ends of the spectrum, they kind of, like I say, it bends round and they meet, and you find that hardcore dogma, don't bother me with the facts, my mind is made up, with the true believers and the diehard debunkers. But I think what makes this different, this whole situation now, is the people that we have coming forward. And I haven't mentioned, but another person to watch closely is Carl Nell. He's a very articulate commentator in this space, verifiably is who he says he is, did what he says he did, and more of the people who've been involved in this and exposed to this information from the inside in the US government, the military, and the intelligence community are coming forward and speaking out. So, people like Carl Nell and Jay Stratton, all those people, as well as Lou Elizondo, David Grush, and some of the others.
And I know we're out of time here, but this is a quick answer. Have you ever seen a UFO? I believe you haven't, right?
I haven't, sadly, but now I live in Tucson and we have great skies here. I live in hope, so my day will come, I'm sure. I hope to.
I really like the picture of you behind you with your face of the alien there, by the way. But I appreciate you coming on and filling us in on all of this news. I guess there was a briefing as we were speaking, so it'll be interesting to hear what the Pentagon briefing said. But I'll let you close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation. And yeah, I'm going to go. I'm not sure, and I always have to do the time calculation in my head, but I'm sure those congressional representatives who attended will be coming out of that, and I'm going to listen to what they have to say. So I would just say, for people who want to follow me, my website is nickpope.net, and the social media platform where I'm most active is X, where my handle is @NickPopeMOD. The MOD, of course, standing for Ministry of Defense.